Okay, guys, so we are now in the last part of our assignment. We are looking at the evaluation, and this is the last chunk of the 3 for the research project, which is very exciting. So one of the really good things about this assignment is that you have already done so much preparation for it that this one's going to be very easy for you to write. Let's have a chat about the structure. So first of all, it's really important that we remember that there is a very strict word count for this of 1,500 words. Additional to this is a 150 word summary. Now we're going to talk about those parts in separate, and we're going to show you what we mean by the words and the summary. The summary effectively is just an introduction to the project that you've done, because the person who marks your project is not necessarily the person who marks your evaluation. One is moderated, one is marked. So it's really important that you are understanding that you need to give a snapshot to your project to the person who is going to be marking your evaluation. Now, evaluation is a project part where you are going to really recount what's happened. But for you to do well, we need to actually evaluate. So you're going to look back on what you've done and you're going to say, all right, well, I did do an interview. That's the recount part, but we want to go better than that. And you're going to actually tell us how useful that process was and make a judgment about it. So you're going to tell us about whether that process that you engaged with was pertinent towards your research findings, whether it actually allowed you to actually develop your thinking, whether it led you to new findings. I just said that, whoops. All sort of useful elements, okay? And then we're going to look at the outcome, and we're going to evaluate if our outcome was very good and if it was insightful and thorough and how well we answered the question. And we're going to look at any decisions we made in responses to challenges or opportunities. So we're not going to actually rabbit on about the challenges and opportunities themselves. We're going to talk about how good we are at responding to those things as capable decision makers. I marked on 4 areas. First area is the insightful evaluation of the research processes used, and it is really important that we're focusing on processes, not just sources, and it's really important that we're also thinking about how specific they were to your research question so that we can show that we didn't just randomly do whatever because our teacher told us, but because we were trying to actually get to the answer. The second part is about the decisions made, and we're going to hear that word decisions like 100 million times because it's so important. Everyone usually focuses on the challenges and opportunities. That's not their focus at all. It's all about the decisions. The third thing that we're going to focus on is the evaluation of the outcome, and we're going to look at how well did we answer that question. Your final part is how well you write it, and there is a clarity and coherency that you will be marked on. So, what do we do to get started? Well, first thing you can do is comment on the processes that you undertook to get to your research. Now, you may have done lots of processes. We do not need to hear all of them. You really only have about 1,000 words to talk about your processes at a maximum. So I would be really strongly thinking about how the processes that were the most useful or the least useful or had some use, the ones that you can really talk about, they're the ones we want to hear about. You're going to really evaluate the usefulness and limitations of these sources, and there's going to be some great keywords that you're going to employ, things like validity, reliability, credibility, and then to explain those terms, you're going to really think about the idea of currency and accuracy and detail and all those things that you wrote about in your annotations. Most importantly, you're going to show us how these processes influence your project. Okay, you're going to tell us what you learnt, what you discovered, what you confirmed, how it extended your knowledge, how it took you down a new tangent. These are all really good buzzwords. I hope you're writing them down because, well, that's the point. So, what are we going to do? We have to think about what was the actual process I undertook. And for us, we know that we have a whole bunch of different places that we got our information. We have an interview, a survey, experiment, action, research, etc., etc., etc. What I want you to really think about, though, is that you're going to do more than just your sources. Okay? These are what you do with the sources. So processes are, let's give you a list. On your scaffold, there is a whole bunch of them. Consultation with experts, development of primary research tools, engagement with networking activities, summary of key findings, literature review, source analysis, cross-comparison, primary processing of interviewing and surveying focus groups experimentation. collation of academic literature, collation of online materials, cross-comparison of survey results, survey of internet material, yada, 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 background research, all of those different things are part of your process. Summary, establishment of key findings, all those things are what you did. So you need to make sure that you establish that and then make a judgment about it. Okay, we're looking at how is it useful or limited, and how was it that this source had flaws but also benefits. So we need to make sure that we have positives and negatives that are showing that we understand that all things have differences that make them useful for a particular context and a particular purpose, but maybe limited for other purposes and contexts. It is really important that you're thinking critically about this. Not every source or process that you've ever done is going to be perfect. You must make sure that you are actually critically evaluating this and not just making big generalizations about the use of a source. Some of the keywords that you should be discussing are validity, reliability, and credibility, and you should be discussing those in an informed way. You need to really understand what it means for a source author to be credible. Okay, what makes someone credible? What makes the data they present reliable? What makes their findings valid? If you can't remember what those terms mean, you need to go back to the other videos where we talked about this and go through it in detail. Don't use these as synonyms. They're not synonyms. Okay, they have very different research principles, and you must be using those accurately to be able to score in a higher band. So let's take a look at what this section looks like. First of all, we have a student who has identified a process. Now they've refined, which is fine, but that's not the main process. What they've actually done is talked about the extensive reading of online journals, and the process of a literature review. The outcome of that is that they have been able to process the data into a refinement. So one of the big things is that it's about research processes, not planning processes. Refinement is part of your planning. So what they have done that's smart here is they've said, well, I had to refine. That was the outcome of my process. But what we've actually done that initiated this was the literature review. So that's really important. Where we have a really nice setup here is the fact that we have an example of a source. So we have Zaki in his article, and we have some findings, and then we have a contrasting perspective that was presented. So here's where the sources come in. They're in the middle there. They're the meat of the sandwich. They're the part that actually helps us to understand what was discovered through this process. Then we have an outcome. Okay, we know that because of these sources, important questions were raised in the last line there, and this was what led to that refinement. So what is your structure for writing? So my advice is that we identify a process, we identify sources, we identify the purpose of this, the outcome around it, we make judgments on the use and limitations, and then we discuss how this has impacted the overall knowledge and skills of or the research.